Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Brian Taylor, educator with the North and South Rivers Watershed Association. Today we're going to be talking about river stories. Every river has a story. And today we're going to be focusing on some restoration work that has been done on this particular stream behind me. So today we are joined by Samantha Woods, Executive Director of the North and South Rivers Watershed Association. Welcome, Sam.
Thank you, Brian. Nice to be here.
So Sam, can you tell us a little bit about this stream here behind us?
So sure, this stream behind us is known as the Third Herring Brook, and it actually is the town boundary between the town of Norwell on this side and Hanover on that side. The brook's headwaters are in Jacob's Pond, which many people I think are familiar with. And then the brook flows out of Jacob's Pond for about 5 miles till it hits the North River. It travels behind the Norwell High School, underneath Route 3, behind the South Shore YMCA, until it gets down here before it enters downstream about a mile into the North River. It has several tributaries, some of which people might be familiar with. So all told, there's about 5 miles of main stem and then 5 miles of additional tributaries that make up the Third Herring Brook watershed. And another interesting point about this watershed that makes it unique is that it's the supply for drinking water for the towns of Norwell and Hanover. Not necessarily the stream itself, but the wells that tap into the groundwater in the watershed, just right next to the brook.
So Sam, what are some of the main concerns here with this river system?
So Brian, some of the main concerns with this brook have been, there were 4 dams placed on the brook back in colonial and industrial times. 1 still remains up at Jacob's Pond, 3 we've taken out. Other concerns with this brook include water withdrawals and their impacts on the brook, particularly during the summertime where we see a lot of high demand of water for outdoor watering, and it really reduces the flow. We see about 50% reduction in flow in the stream in the summertime, and sometimes when we have drought periods, we've seen a completely dry stream with dead fish in it. So definitely a concern. And then stormwater runoff from areas of the watershed that have been paved over, overdeveloped. Areas like Route 53 feed into this system. So anything that's on a paved surface can run off into our streams and be a potential pollutant.
So what's some of the restoration work that has been done here on Third Herring Brook?
So the North and South Rivers Watershed Association, in partnership with different owners of the dams that used to be on this brook, worked over the last decade and a half to remove 3 of them so far. So there are 4 dams, however. So 3 have been removed to restore a natural flowing river system. So here we are right now at one of those sites where we removed a dam, and now the river is flowing freely. Upstream we've removed 2 more, one at the YMCA and one with the mall. And then we're working on a fish ladder at Jacob's Pond as a partial restoration to get at least the herring that use fish ladders up into the pond. We've also worked with the communities of Norwell and Hanover to try to reduce their water consumption during the summertime, a lot through education of our citizens who live in these communities about the impacts that they're having when they are going out and using their irrigation systems. It really is having a dramatic impact on our natural watershed systems and on the species of fish and other wildlife that rely on this river for their habitat and food.
All right, what were some of the main challenges and concerns that you were faced with all this restoration work here?
So Brian, some of the main concerns that were raised when we first proposed the removal of the dams was the loss of pond habitat. People who have grown up here and who live here have really become accustomed to that man-made pond and didn't necessarily understand the impacts it was having on the river. So that was something, you know, we had to overcome through education and engaging people in actually monitoring the river. And another challenge, as I mentioned, was the water withdrawals. And again, that's education. One of the challenges is really getting people to value this natural water system over perhaps a green lawn. Really thinking about a little sacrifice that they could make to help improve our natural resources.
So what are some of the impacts these dams had on our rivers here?
The dams that were on the river system here, like dams throughout our state and our country, they fragment the river's habitat and prevent fish and other species who would be normally migrating through the river from being able to access different habitats, so really chops up our river system. It also increases the temperature of the water, because as we hold back that water, we're creating a bigger water sheet that gets more solar gain. By creating more increased temperature in that water, we are reducing oxygen levels in that water. And then sediment is being held back. So in a normal river, sediment is flowing along with the river down into our marshes, feeding our marsh systems, feeding our coastlines. Here, when we have dams, they prohibit that sediment and they build up behind the dam. So there's a lot of different impacts that a dam can have on a river that are maybe not as obvious to most people. Another one is in the summertime, if we don't have what's called a stream flow release plan, these dams can actually dewater the stream downstream. By holding back that water to keep the water in the pond, there's no water flowing out, and so we can have a dry stream bed downstream of that dam.
So what are some of the considerations one must take when planning or implementing big restorations projects like this?
So when we are considering whether or not to remove a dam, we need to take quite a bit into consideration. First of all and foremost is whether the owner of the dam is interested in removing it. Oftentimes they are, because it's a liability. Many people don't understand that a dam, if it fails, all the liability is on the owner. So if somebody gets hurt or there's damage to property, those responsibilities come with the ownership of the dam. And oftentimes there's no insurance that would actually insure a dam. Many of these dams were leftovers from the colonial and industrial era, and their owners just sort of inherited them when they became owners of the property. And so they're not sized to today's standards for flooding. So when we have bigger storms, as we see now with climate change, we're having more extreme weather, those dams may not be able to pass the storm event, and they may breach as a result of it. So for many communities, if the public owns the dam or even a private dam owner, that's a big consideration, is this liability and the fact that the flooding could be on them. So that's something we have to think about. And when we remove a dam, we have to just consider all of that and have engineers make sure that we're not making any conditions worse. Because these dams were built and then we've built around them, we want to make sure that we're not harming any properties by removing the dam. And then sediment, the quality of the sediment is something we have to take into consideration. Sometimes there can be contamination that has ended up in the sediments behind the dam, so that's something we need to think about as well. As well as infrastructure costs, and again, public sentiment is something that we need to think about when we're considering dam removal.
Wow. So Sam, what are some of the positive outcomes that can come from the restoration work that has been done or will be done?
So here on the Third Herring Brook, we've had multiple positive outcomes as a result of the removal of the 3 dams on the Third Herring Brook. One is this return of river herring to this stretch of the river. They've been seen all the way up past the 3rd dam that we removed behind the Hanover Mall now. So their expansion of their populations and spawning habitat has been, is starting to be realized, and we hope that their populations will continue to grow as a result of that. But there's other species like eastern native brook trout that are freshwater. They need cold running water. They used to be just in the tributaries to the Third Herring Brook, and now we're finding them actually in the main stem. And in fact, this solar array that you see behind us is part of a tagging system that we're monitoring the eastern native brook trout as they're returning and using that main stem. And with that came some protections for this brook, because it's now considered a cold water fisheries resource, which means that there's an extra layer of regulatory protection along the brook that can prevent overdevelopment on the banks, so that any stormwater that may be generated by development that might be close enough will have to be put back into the ground to cool it, rather than just letting it run off of a pavement and be heated and put into the brook. So we've had a lot of really good outcomes so far. We continue to monitor them, and we're really excited about what the future holds.
Wow. What are some things that the folks, the students of Norwell can do to help the waterways like Third Herring Brook here in their town and community?
Brian, that's a great question. I mean, really, one of the things that they're doing right now is helping, right? Just becoming aware that there is this brook and what its history has been, and some of the impacts and how we've started to restore it, and making themselves more knowledgeable about river habitat and the need to restore it, I think is like the first step everybody can take. Second then is to take some action. If there is a discussion about dam removal, become educated about that particular dam and the pros and cons of removing it. Hopefully educating others about some of the pros of restoring this kind of habitat, one that is endangered throughout the world. This free-flowing river system is really important, so supporting dam removal when you can. It's not going to be in every case that we take out a dam, but it is the preferred sort of highest and best use of a river, to let it be a river. And then individually at your own homes, on your own properties, not watering our lawns is like super key, particularly in areas where we're seeing the over-withdrawal impacts on our river systems. Not fertilizing, because the nitrogen and phosphorus runs off into the system and can create other problems on the ecosystem. Really planting things that are native, enhancing the environment rather than trying to control it all the time in a different way. So those are just some things that I think individuals should do, but I think the most important is to become educated.
Wow, thanks so much, Sam. That's amazing, the story of this river, the work that has been done, and all the positive outcomes that have come from it. So there you have it, folks. There is something that everybody can do within their communities to help their water, their streams, their rivers, their watershed. It doesn't have to be big projects like removing dams. Everyone can do something small, because of course, it's all those small little changes that can add up to big positive outcomes within their towns and communities. Once again, thanks so much for joining us. My name is Brian Taylor with the North and South Rivers Watershed Association, and we will see you around the watershed.